Hey everyone. Tonight we're going to dive into the kind of story that feels less like history and more like a Hollywood fever dream. Imagine, if you will, the gray, choppy waters of the Atlantic, somewhere off the coast of Spain. You're a fisherman, and your boat is rhythmically rising and falling with the waves. It's a quiet morning, just you and the seagulls. But then, you spot it. A shape bobbing unnaturally in the distance. It's a human body, dressed in the crisp uniform of a British Royal Marine, floating face down. You probably wouldn't survive the ordeal that led to this, or the geopolitical chess match about to unfold. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You pull the body aboard, a heavy, sodden weight. The face is unrecognizable, but the uniform is a telltale sign. More importantly, clutched to the body by a chain and a pair of white gloves is a briefcase. This isn't a run-of-the-mill drowning victim. This is a British courier, a man carrying official documents. His papers identify him as Major William Martin of the Royal Marines. A quick glance inside his pockets reveals a world of personal detail. A half-used pack of cigarettes, theater ticket stubs, a picture of his fiancée, Pam, and some keys. The documents in the briefcase are stamped top secret, and they're addressed to a high-ranking British general in North Africa. This whole scene, you're told, is an accident. A sad, tragic misfortune. But you, my friend, are about to be a very small, very important cog in one of the most audacious deceptions of World War II. This is the opening act of Operation Mincemeat, a plan so outlandish it almost defies belief. The year is 1943. The Allies are bogged down, and the Nazis are still holding much of Europe in an iron grip. The next logical move for the Allied forces is an invasion of Sicily. It's the soft underbelly of Europe, the perfect jumping-off point to push into mainland Italy. There's just one problem. It's a strategic no-brainer, and the Germans know it. The island is heavily fortified. An invasion there would be a bloodbath. So, what do you do when the obvious move is also the deadliest? You make your enemies believe the obvious move is something else entirely. You create a distraction so perfect, so utterly convincing, that they'll divert their resources to a completely different location. That's where Major William Martin comes in. The problem, as you'll soon find out, is that there is no Major William Martin. The man you just pulled from the sea is a corpse, a carefully selected body, and everything on him, from the love letters to the theater tickets, is a meticulously crafted fake. The briefcase, sealed with its official stamps, contains the heart of the deception, forged documents that prove the Allied invasion is coming not to Sicily, but to Greece and Sardinia. The Allies didn't just stumble upon this brilliant idea. It was born from a desperate need for a game-changer. The man in the water is the star of a play designed to fool a very discerning and very dangerous audience, Adolf Hitler and his generals. It's a testament to the chaos and ingenuity of wartime that a dead man could be considered a viable strategic asset. Historians still argue whether the mission's success was more about its cleverness or the sheer incompetence of the Nazi intelligence services. But what is undeniable is that this single, bizarre mission, which relied on the gullibility of an entire enemy army, changed the course of the war. As the Spanish authorities take possession of the body and its briefcase, the clock begins. The documents must be handled just right. They must fall into the hands of the German spies in Spain, the Abwehr, in a way that looks accidental. If the Germans suspect for even a moment that this is a trick, the entire operation will fail. But for now, you just have a dead man, a briefcase, and the overwhelming feeling that you've stumbled into a story that is far, far bigger than you are. You're not in a fishing boat anymore. You're in a smoke-filled room in Whitehall, London, where the British intelligence apparatus is a finely tuned, albeit often eccentric, machine. The year is still 1943. Operation Husky, the invasion of Sicily, is in the final planning stages, but the air is heavy with dread. The intelligence is clear. German Field Marshal Kesselring has already moved troops and armor to Sicily in anticipation of the attack. An amphibious assault against a heavily defended island is suicide. It would be a second Gallipoli, a repeat of the D-Day Dieppe raid disaster, but on a much grander scale. They need a distraction, something monumental enough to move Hitler's pieces on the chessboard. Enter two very different and very brilliant spy masters. The first is Lieutenant Commander Ewan Montague, a naval intelligence officer and a barrister by trade. He's meticulous, detail-oriented, and has the kind of dry wit you'd expect from a British lawyer. The second is Flight Lieutenant Charles Cholmondeley, pronounced Chumley, a more freewheeling member of the RAF intelligence service. Cholmondeley is the one who first proposed a truly bizarre idea, using a body to deliver false information. The concept, which he'd previously pitched, was to drop a corpse with a parachute behind enemy lines, carrying a fake radio set and a message. It sounds like something out of a pulp novel, and it was initially dismissed as too crazy. But now, with the stakes so high, Montague and Cholmondeley dusted off the old idea. They called their plan Operation Mincemeat, a decidedly unglamorous name for such a high-stakes mission. The goal was to plant the body and the documents in neutral Spain. Why Spain? Because while officially neutral, General Franco's regime was leaning heavily toward the Axis powers, and the country was crawling with both Allied and German spies. It was the perfect place for a body to be found, and for information to accidentally fall into enemy hands without arousing too much suspicion. It would be a messy, chaotic scene that would appear completely unplanned. A simple drowning accident, they hoped, would look much more convincing than a perfectly dropped parachute. This is one of those moments in history where the most successful strategy is the one that looks the most like a mistake. The key to the whole operation, they realized, was not just the information, but the man carrying it. The corpse couldn't just be any corpse. It had to be someone who would plausibly be carrying top-secret documents. A naval officer seemed perfect. They even came up with a cheeky name for the fictional man they were about to create. William Martin. Why Martin? Because it was one of the most common surnames in the British Army, and therefore hard for the Germans to trace. Why William? Because that too was a common name. It was a deliberate choice to make their fictional man as bland and unremarkable as possible, the kind of person who could plausibly exist, but was too generic to be a memorable character in the minds of German intelligence. The plan was audacious and simple in its madness. They would find a suitable body, give him a convincing new identity, and create a fake backstory so full of mundane details that it felt real. Then they would attach a briefcase filled with fake, but compelling documents, drop him off the coast of Spain, and hope that the Germans would take the bait. It was a long shot, a Hail Mary pass, and the entire fate of the invasion of Sicily was riding on it. Montague and Cholmondeley were not just creating a lie, they were building an entire new world for a dead man to inhabit. It was part art, part science, and a whole lot of sheer audacity. Historians still debate whether a less elaborate plan might have worked just as well, given the Germans' desire to believe Allied intelligence. But the painstaking detail of Operation Mincemeat is what made it so compelling, and ultimately so successful. The sheer commitment to the ruse, down to every last invented detail, is what sold the lie. You have to remember, this wasn't just a military operation. It was a psychological one, designed to play on the hopes, fears, and biases of the enemy. And the first step was to find a body, a man who would become a national hero without ever knowing it. Now that you've got the blueprint, it's time to meet the architects of this macabre masterpiece. You're in a dingy, cluttered office, the kind of place where grand conspiracies are born, not with dramatic flourishes, but with the rustle of papers and the clinking of teacups. The central figure is Lieutenant Commander Ewan Montague. He's a man who understands the law, which is a big advantage when you're about to commit what is, in a very technical sense, a series of illegal acts. But more than that, he's a man with a sense of the absurd. He knows that the most convincing lie is one that has a touch of reality's messy, chaotic nature to it. You get the sense he's a bit of a bookworm who suddenly found himself in a high-stakes spy thriller. Then there's Charles Cholmondeley, who is essentially the ideas man of the group. His background is a bit more scattered than Montague's, a career in the RAF, but with a knack for thinking outside the box, or in this case, outside the grave. He's the one who initially conceived of the corpse's courier idea. He's the one who brought the spark, the initial flicker of madness that Montague then shaped into a roaring fire. You can almost see them together, Montague with his precise, legalistic mind, running through the possibilities and pitfalls, and Cholmondeley, leaning back in his chair, a mischievous glint in his eye, saying things like, "What if we also give him a picture of a really fetching fiancé?" Their team also includes Captain Sir Christopher Masterman, who was a specialist in disinformation, and a range of unsung heroes from across the British establishment. This wasn't a one-man show. It was a whole-of-government effort, bringing together people from the intelligence services, the Navy, the Foreign Office, and even the local coroner's office. You'd think an operation this bizarre would be a closely guarded secret from the start, but the team had to get approval from various committees and high-ranking officials. Imagine having to stand up in front of a room of stuffy bureaucrats and explain your plan to use a dead body to fool Hitler. It's the kind of pitch that makes you glad you weren't in that room. The proposal must have sounded like pure insanity, a desperate last resort born of too many late nights and too much gin. But the sheer desperation of the war effort, and the catastrophic alternative of a full frontal assault on Sicily, made them listen. The most crucial step was getting Churchill's approval. A prime minister known for his audacious plans and love of clever ruses, Churchill apparently gave his blessing with a single dry comment, "I hope you are not making a balls of it." This single line encapsulates the entire mood of the operation. It was a high-risk, high-reward gamble, and everyone involved knew it. It is a mainstream historical fact that Churchill was a great supporter of special operations and deceptions, and this was perhaps the most special of them all. Now for a quirky tidbit. During the planning, Montague and Cholmondeley needed a place to store the corpse. You can't just leave it in the corridor, right? So they put the body in a deep freeze in a government cold store. A bizarre and slightly macabre detail that adds to the surreal nature of the whole story. Imagine working there, opening a freezer and seeing a dead body in a Royal Marine uniform next to a few crates of frozen fish. It's the kind of scene that would make you question your career choices. Historians still argue whether the entire team was truly a secret club or just a group of individuals who came together for a single mission. But what is clear is the unique mix of personalities. The pragmatic Montague, the imaginative Cholmondeley, and the myriad of other experts who made the insane possible. They were not your typical soldiers. They were thinkers, dreamers, and in a way, artists. Their canvas was the corpse of a man who was about to become the most important fake person in the world. Their art was a lie, a beautiful, perfect lie that would save thousands of lives. With the plan approved and the team in place, the next and perhaps most macabre step begins: finding the right corpse. You can't just use any old body. It had to be a person who died in a way that would be consistent with a drowning at sea. That means no bullet holes, no visible injuries, and no signs of disease that would raise red flags during an autopsy. A healthy man who died from pneumonia was the ideal candidate. The cold water would have masked any signs of the illness, making it appear as if the man had drowned, and the fluid in his lungs would be a perfect match for a drowning victim. The British intelligence officers, working with the London coroner, scoured the morgues for a suitable candidate. They eventually found their man, a vagrant named Glyndwr Michael. Michael had died of pneumonia but had no family, no permanent address, and no one who would miss him. This wasn't just a matter of convenience, it was a matter of national security. They needed someone whose absence wouldn't be noticed, whose identity could be completely erased and replaced. The morality of using a dead man for such a purpose is a question that would later be debated, but in the chaos of wartime, the end justified the means. The body was treated with utmost secrecy and respect. It was kept on ice, not just to preserve it, but to keep its temperature consistent with a person who had spent several days in the cold ocean. They needed to make the ruse as convincing as possible. This is where the attention to detail comes in. The man they found, Glyndwr Michael, had a very specific physical appearance, and his age had to be consistent with the identity they were about to create. He was a perfect blank slate. This is a mainstream historical fact, though for many years the identity of the corpse was a closely guarded secret. It wasn't until decades later that the truth about Glyndwr Michael, the man who became Major Martin, was revealed. This is a crucial point because it highlights the level of secrecy surrounding the operation. It wasn't just a matter of fooling the Germans. It was a matter of keeping the truth from their own people for decades. Now, for a quirky tidbit. The team considered a number of different scenarios for the corpse's death. One idea was a parachutist who died in a mid-air collision. Another was a pilot whose plane crashed into the sea. But they settled on a drowning victim because it was the most likely to be accepted without question by the Spanish authorities. A simple accident, after all, is far less likely to be investigated with suspicion than a complicated one. Historians still debate whether the use of Glindermichael's body was a moral gray area. On one hand, he was a man with no family to mourn him, and his death served a greater purpose. On the other, he was an individual whose body was used without his consent. It's a question that has no easy answer and is a reminder of the ethical compromises that are often made during wartime. The operation was about to move to its next phase, building a fake identity from the ground up, turning a man who had nothing into a man who had a whole life, a life that was about to be cut tragically short. With Glindermichael now a military asset, the focus shifts to creating Major William Martin. This isn't just a simple identity, it's a living, breathing, and tragically human character. You're in a room where a group of intelligence officers are meticulously crafting a man's life. Think of it like a very morbid, very high-stakes character creation screen in a video game. Every single detail matters. The first step is giving him a rank and a unit. Major William Martin of the Royal Marines. A major is high enough to be trusted with top-secret documents, but not so high that his death would immediately raise an alarm in German intelligence circles. A Royal Marine is a perfect choice, as their duties often involve being couriers and they are known for their physical fitness. The team gives him a birthday, March 29th, 1907. That makes him 36, a respectable age for a major. He gets a service number, 14549, and a rank, acting major. This is a crucial detail. An acting rank suggests he's not a permanent major, which adds a layer of believability to the fabricated identity. Now for the fun part, giving him a personal life. They can't just put the documents in a briefcase and call it a day. The Germans would be suspicious. A man on a mission would have personal effects, things that give him a human face. So the team invents a fiancée, Pam. They write a series of love letters from her, all of them slightly mundane but deeply affectionate. The letters talk about her life in London, her hopes for the future, and her plans to meet him for dinner. They even give her a phone number, which is a number for a secure telephone line in British intelligence. This is a mainstream historical fact that shows the incredible level of detail in the operation. They also create a series of other personal items. They find a picture of a woman named Jean Leslie, an MI5 secretary, and use it as a photo of Pam. It's an ordinary picture, not a glamour shot, which makes it even more convincing. They give him ticket stubs from a London theater, a key for a British government club, a bill from a tailor, and a dog license. They even put a St. Christopher's medal in his pocket, a small talisman for safe travel. You can just picture them, a group of brilliant spooks debating whether a major would have a bank overdraft notice or not. They decide he would, because a little bit of financial trouble makes a character more relatable and believable. It's that touch of imperfection that makes the lie feel like the truth. This is a quirky tidbit, but it's a crucial one. Montague himself later wrote that the key to the whole operation was to give the Germans something to bite on. They had to make the lie so rich and so detailed that the Germans would be too busy trying to piece together the life of Major Martin to question the validity of the documents themselves. The personal items were the bait, and the documents were the trap. Historians still debate whether all this detail was strictly necessary. Could they have just used a body and the documents? Maybe. But the team's commitment to the ruse is what makes it a classic story of espionage. They weren't just forging documents. They were creating a ghost, a phantom of a man who would haunt the German intelligence services. And now that he had a life, he was ready to die. The life of Major William Martin isn't just about his rank and his backstory. It's about the tangible evidence of that life. You're watching the team meticulously craft the physical proof of his existence. This is where the artistry of the lie really takes shape. The goal isn't just to fool a few spies, it's to fool an entire intelligence apparatus, from the initial finder to the top brass in Berlin. Every item had to look and feel authentic, something a person would actually carry with them. The first thing you notice is the photo of his fiancée, Pam. They selected a picture of a real woman, Jean Leslie, a secretary at MI5. But it's not a glamour shot. It's an ordinary, slightly blurry photograph of a pretty, smiling woman in a bathing suit. It's the kind of picture a man might carry in his wallet, not one a professional spy would expect to see. It is a mainstream historical fact that this specific detail was included to add a layer of human credibility to the ruse. They needed the Germans to feel a pang of sympathy for the man, to see him as a person, not a prop. Then there are the letters. Ewan Montague and his team wrote a series of letters from Pam to William. The letters were mundane, filled with small talk about social events, family updates, and the general anxieties of a wartime relationship. One letter mentions a visit to their local bank manager about an overdraft. Another laments not being able to take a holiday together. These details were crucial. They weren't a spy's correspondence. They were a lover's. It's a testament to the team's brilliance that they understood the power of the ordinary. They also put a telegram from his father and a letter from a bank manager about a minor overdraft in his pocket. The overdraft was a masterstroke, a quirky detail that made William Martin seem like a real person, not a fictional hero. The ticket stubs are another perfect example of this attention to detail. They got real ticket stubs from a recent play at a West End theater. They were even from a show that would have been current at the time. This detail is a fantastic example of a quirky tidbit that sells the whole lie. Who would bother to fake something as insignificant as a theater ticket? Only someone committed to an absolutely perfect deception. The same goes for the keys to a London club and the various other bits of everyday life they put in his pockets. It was all designed to create a sense of lived-in reality, a man who existed not just on paper but in the world. Historians still argue whether the Germans were fooled by the personal details or if the documents themselves were enough to convince them. But what is undeniable is that the personal items provided a crucial shield for the documents. They gave the German intelligence a reason to believe the man was who he claimed to be. Without the humanizing elements, the whole thing would have looked too clean, too perfect, and therefore too suspicious. The Germans would have seen a body and a briefcase, and their first thought would have been, trap. Instead, they saw a man, a fiancé, an overdraft, and a tragic drowning, and they thought, opportunity. The stage was set, the actor was ready, and the final piece of the puzzle was about to be put in place. With Major William Martin's new life fully formed, it's time for the heart of the operation, the forged documents. You're now in a secure room, watching Ewan Montague and Charles Cholmondeley carefully handle the most critical part of the entire ruse. The briefcase, a worn leather model that looks like it's seen a few trips, is ready. Inside, the key is not one document, but a carefully constructed series of them, designed to paint a convincing picture of Allied intent. The central piece is a letter from Lieutenant General Archibald Nye, the Vice Chief of the Imperial General Staff, to General Sir Harold Alexander, the commander of Allied forces in North Africa. The letter is a perfect piece of misdirection. It casually mentions the upcoming invasion of Sicily as a feint, a ruse to mask the true objectives, Greece and Sardinia. The language is deliberately vague, using phrases like, "We have a good chance of bluffing them into thinking we will go for Sicily," which is a clever way of making the fake plan seem real. It's a mainstream historical fact that this letter was a brilliant piece of psychological warfare, designed to appeal to German High Command's desire to believe they had uncovered a great secret. But that's not all. A single letter would be too suspicious. So they added a second, seemingly more mundane piece of correspondence. This was a letter from Lord Louis Mountbatten, Chief of Combined Operations to Admiral of the Fleet, Sir Andrew Cunningham, Commander-in-Chief Mediterranean. This letter was meant to be a simple, friendly note, a nod to the insider knowledge shared between two high-ranking officers. In this letter, Mountbatten mentions a new device, a type of landing craft, and asks Cunningham to take care of it for the invasion. The casual nature of this second letter made the first, more dramatic, one seem more believable. A quirky tidbit. To make the paper look like it had been handled, they creased and uncrumpled it and even added a drop of tea for a subtle stain. This touch of imperfection was meant to replicate a courier's normal handling of documents. The documents were then placed in a briefcase, which was sealed with official-looking stamps and a padlock. The padlock wasn't just for show. It was a way to make the German intelligence officers think they had to work hard to get the documents, which would make them even more valuable in their eyes. The briefcase was then attached to the body of WWII. The chain was carefully arranged to make it look like the briefcase had been a part of him during the drowning, and his hand was gloved and chained to it, a final piece of stagecraft. Historians still argue whether the document's content was more effective than the personal details in convincing the Germans. But the genius of Operation Mincemeat was that it didn't rely on one or the other. It relied on both. The documents were the main event, but the personal life of Major Martin was the opening act, the warm-up that made the audience receptive to the main show. They were a carefully constructed narrative, a lie that was so complex and so well executed that it felt more real than the truth. With the documents in place, the stage was set for the final act of this bizarre and audacious play. The stage is set, the actor is ready, and now it's time for the final, most precarious leg of the journey. You're no longer in a cozy London office. You're aboard a submarine, the HMS Seraph. This isn't just any submarine, it's a vessel of silent warfare, and it's about to undertake one of the strangest missions in naval history. The year is still 1943. The submarine has a unique and slightly unsettling cargo. The body of WWII, now the impeccably dressed Major William Martin, stored in a special container filled with dry ice to keep him from decomposing. The submarine leaves a British port and heads toward the coast of Spain. The journey itself is uneventful, a quiet, tense passage beneath the waves. The crew is, for the most part, completely unaware of the true nature of the mission. They just know they have a strange, sealed container and orders to deliver it to a specific location. Imagine the rumors and speculation among the sailors. A top-secret prototype? A new type of weapon? The truth, as you know, is far stranger than any of their guesses. This is a mainstream historical fact, the use of a submarine for the mission, and it highlights the extraordinary lengths the British were willing to go to make this deception work. As the submarine glides through the waters, the crew is performing their duties with a quiet professionalism. They are a well-oiled machine, but today, they are part of a bizarre, unprecedented operation. The body is kept in a sealed steel container, the lid of which is locked with a key. It's a surreal image, a high-tech war machine carrying a dead man for a clandestine drop. It's a moment where modern technology meets a very ancient form of trickery. A quirky tidbit that adds to the bizarre nature of the trip. The submarine's commander, Lieutenant Bill Jewell, was given specific, highly unusual instructions. He was told to surface at a certain point off the Spanish coast, launch the body and the briefcase into the water, and then immediately submerge and leave the area. He was also instructed to read a specific poem to the body before it was launched, a bit of morbid theatrics designed to add to the surreal nature of the mission. The poem, "And all for the want of a nail," was a nod to the fact that the entire mission could fail with one small mistake. It's a detail that adds a human, slightly off-kilter touch to the cold, hard logic of military planning. Historians still argue whether the entire mission was an elaborate piece of performance art designed to boost morale, or if it was truly a vital military operation. But what is undeniable is that every step, from the choice of the body to the journey of the submarine, was carefully calculated to achieve a single goal: to get the documents to the Germans. The submarine, this gray steel behemoth of war, was not just a vehicle, it was a stage. The crew were not just sailors. They were unwitting players in a play that would save thousands of lives. The final moment of truth was about to arrive. You're standing on the deck of the submarine, the cold, salty spray of the Mediterranean Sea, a sharp contrast to the humid air of Spain. The time is 4:30 a.m. on April 30th, 1943. The submarine, the HMS Seraph, has surfaced a mile and a half off the coast of Huelva, a small town in southern Spain. This is the moment of truth, the climax of a plan hatched in the smoke-filled rooms of London. Ewan Montague and Charles Cholmondeley had traveled with the submarine, a final act of commitment to their bizarre mission. They are on deck, a small, somber group, watching the crew prepare the body for its final journey. The steel container that held Glinder Michael for the past few weeks is brought up from below. The air is still, save for the lapping of the waves against the submarine's hull and the quiet, almost reverent movements of the sailors. The body, still dressed in its Royal Marine uniform and with the briefcase attached, is removed from the container. It's a surreal sight. This man, who had no name and no home in life, is now the star of a grand performance. He is a prop, a decoy, and a crucial piece of a geopolitical chess game. The team carefully attaches a life vest to the body, a final touch of realism to make it look like a tragic accident. They also give him a small note in his pocket that reads, "I am drowning." This is a mainstream historical fact, a macabre touch of dark humor that was included in case the body was found immediately after the drop, to make it look like a real, frantic last thought. Now for a quirky tidbit. The team had also placed a small note in the body's pocket with a quote from Shakespeare's Hamlet. The quote, "To be or not to be," was a little nod to the high-stakes gamble they were making. It was a private joke, a small bit of gallows humor that only they would ever understand. It's the kind of thing that makes you realize these weren't just spy masters, they were artists of deception. The body is then slipped into the cold waters of the Mediterranean. It's a quiet, almost silent moment. The body bobs on the surface for a moment before the crew attaches it to a floating buoy, a measure to ensure it doesn't drift out to sea and is found near the shore. With the body and the briefcase now in the water, the submarine immediately submerges and heads back to Gibraltar. Their part of the mission is over. Historians still argue whether the entire drop was a fluke of luck or a perfectly calculated moment. But what is undeniable is that the timing was everything. The body had to be found quickly before decomposition could set in, and it had to be found by the right people, specifically the fishermen who would report it to the authorities. The fate of Operation Mincemeat, and by extension the invasion of Sicily, now rested on a single dead man, floating in the sea off the coast of Spain. The clock was ticking, and the game had begun. The whole world was about to be fooled by a lie. The next morning, you're no longer a spy on a submarine, but a simple Spanish fisherman, casting your nets off the coast of Huelva. The sun is just peeking over the horizon, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and pink. The work is quiet, repetitive, and peaceful. But then you see it, a body, floating in the water. It's a somber, tragic sight, but not entirely uncommon for those who make their living on the sea. You pull the body aboard, and that's when the strangeness begins. The man is dressed in a smart, crisp British uniform. He's wearing a Royal Marine greatcoat, which is a bit heavy for the water, but not unheard of. He has a life vest on, but it appears to be deflated, as if it failed to work. This is a mainstream historical fact, the intentional failure of the life vest being a crucial part of the deception. The spy masters needed the body to look like it had been in the water for a few days, so a fully inflated vest wouldn't have made sense. The man's face is bloated and his hands are clenched as if in a death grip. And of course there's the briefcase chained to his wrist. You report the body to the local authorities, who in turn contact the British vice-consul in Huelva, a man named Francis Hazelden. Hazelden is no fool. He immediately recognizes the potential significance of the find and contacts his superiors in London. He has his suspicions, but he plays his role perfectly, acting as a concerned British official trying to retrieve the body of a fallen officer. The Spanish authorities, led by Lieutenant Colonel Ramon Poveda, are initially very by the book. They conduct a thorough autopsy, and their report confirms what the British wanted them to believe. The man died from drowning, and his organs showed signs of several days in the water. The details of the Spanish autopsy report are another mainstream historical fact, and they were a vital piece of the puzzle, providing a stamp of official verification for the deception. A quirky tidbit that adds to the bizarre nature of the story is the behavior of the Spanish coroner. During the autopsy, he found evidence of pneumonia in the man's lungs. Instead of being suspicious, he concluded that the man had been suffering from a minor cold before his death, which made the drowning more likely to be a tragic accident rather than something more sinister. This little bit of medical misinterpretation was a stroke of luck for the British, as it provided a perfect, plausible explanation for the man's death. It made the story more human and less like a spy thriller. Historians still argue whether the Spanish authorities were genuinely fooled or if they, like a good poker player, were just pretending to believe the story to see what would happen. But what is undeniable is that their actions, by the book and seemingly without suspicion, set the stage for the next phase of the operation. The briefcase, the most important part of the ruse, was now in the hands of the Spanish authorities. The clock was ticking, and the German spies in Spain were about to get wind of the biggest secret of the war. The body of Major William Martin, or Glyndwr Michael as you now know him, is at a morgue in Huelva, Spain. The Spanish authorities, while officially neutral, are a complex mix of pro-Allied and pro-Axis sympathies. Lieutenant Colonel Ramon Poveda, the military judge in charge of the case, is a professional. He performs a meticulous investigation. A full autopsy is conducted, and the report notes that the man's lungs are filled with seawater, a detail that perfectly aligns with the British deception. It is a mainstream historical fact that this autopsy report provided the Germans with the first piece of official verification for the story. The British Vice Consul, Francis Hazelden, is playing his role to perfection. He demands the immediate return of the body and the briefcase, citing diplomatic immunity and the sensitive nature of military documents. This is a crucial piece of the puzzle. His aggression and insistence are designed to make the Germans believe the British are desperate to get the briefcase back, which would in turn make its contents seem even more valuable. It's a classic reverse psychology play, a simple human gambit in a world of high-tech espionage. The Spanish authorities, however, are in no hurry to return the briefcase. They are under pressure from the German spies in Spain, the Abwehr, who have already heard about the discovery. The head of the Abwehr in Spain, Major Karl Erich Kuhlenthal, is a seasoned intelligence officer. He smells a rat, but he also smells an opportunity. The briefcase is a tantalizing prospect. What if it contains the real plans for the Allied invasion? The risk is that it's a trap, but the reward is too great to ignore. A quirky tidbit that adds to the suspense. The Spanish authorities initially refused to open the briefcase, saying that only the British could do so. This created a tense standoff that lasted for several days, during which both Allied and Axis spies were desperately trying to get their hands on the documents. The Spanish were in a unique position of power, holding the key to a potential game-changing piece of intelligence. Historians still argue whether the Spanish authorities were acting on their own, or if they were subtly colluding with the Germans from the start. But what is clear is that their actions created a perfect scenario for the Abwehr to get the briefcase. The tension, the back and forth, and the refusal to open the documents all added to the sense of a genuine mystery. And as the days passed, the pressure mounted, and the Germans were about to make their move. The stage was set for the briefcase and its precious contents to fall into the wrong hands, which, as you know, was exactly the right hands. The briefcase is now a pawn in a game of cat and mouse. You're in a high-stakes standoff watching as both Allied and German intelligence agencies try to get their hands on it. The British, through Vice Consul Hazelden, are playing the role of the frustrated by-the-book diplomats, demanding the return of the property of a dead officer. This is a mainstream historical fact, the British using formal diplomatic channels as part of their cover story. It was a clever way to add pressure without arousing too much suspicion. The German spies in Spain, the Abwehr, are a different story. They've heard about the body and the briefcase and they're desperate to get their hands on it. They know Spain is a hotbed of Allied and Axis espionage, and they're afraid the British will get the briefcase back before they can. They put pressure on their contacts within the Spanish government, particularly those who are sympathetic to the Axis cause. The Germans don't want to use force as it would cause a diplomatic incident and alert the British that the ruse is working. Instead, they use a more subtle approach, relying on their contacts to accidentally get the briefcase for them. A quirky tidbit that adds to the intrigue. The Spanish authorities initially stored the briefcase in a safe at the naval headquarters in Huelva. This was a problem for the Germans, who needed to get a look at the documents without opening the briefcase themselves. So they hatched a plan. They would use a contact in the naval headquarters to break into the safe and borrow the briefcase for a few hours. This would allow them to open it, photograph the documents, and return it to the safe without anyone being the wiser. The whole thing was a delicate ballet of deception. with the Spanish officials pretending to be fooled by the Germans, and the Germans pretending to be fooled by the British. Historians still argue whether the Spanish authorities' collusion with the Germans was a deliberate act of betrayal or a simple matter of convenience. But what is undeniable is that the Germans' desire for the documents and the British's seeming desperation to get them back created a perfect storm. The more the British insisted on the briefcase's return, the more the Germans were convinced of its importance. It was a self-fulfilling prophecy, and the Germans were about to take the bait, hook, line, and sinker. The briefcase was about to embark on its most important journey yet. The moment of truth has arrived. The briefcase, with its tantalizing top-secret stamp, has successfully piqued the interest of the German Abwehr. You're watching from the shadows as the German spy network in Spain swings into action. They've been told by their Spanish contacts that the British are acting desperate, which confirms their suspicions that the documents inside are genuine and of immense value. This is a mainstream historical fact. The Germans' desire to believe they had a scoop was a crucial part of the deception's success. They wanted to believe the British had made a mistake, and the personal effects of Major Martin made it all the more plausible. The Germans, through their contact in the Spanish naval headquarters, get a few hours with the briefcase. They don't have the key to the padlock, so they have to pry it open. They are careful not to damage the lock too much, as they intend to replace it with a nearly identical one, so that the British, when they finally get the briefcase back, won't suspect a thing. This is a crucial detail, a quirky tidbit that shows the Germans were just as committed to the game of deception as the British. They even went so far as to find a local locksmith to create a duplicate lock, so that the ruse would hold up to scrutiny. Inside the briefcase, they find the forged documents. They don't just read them, they meticulously photograph every single page. The letters from General Nye to General Alexander, and the one from Lord Mountbatten to Admiral Cunningham are the main course. The Germans, with their eyes on the prize, don't even question the personal effects. The love letters, the movie stubs, the overdraft notice. They're so focused on the documents themselves that they accept the rest of the backstory at face value. This is a key psychological victory for the British. The German spies are so convinced that they have stumbled upon a gold mine of intelligence that they ignore the little inconsistencies that might have given the game away. The documents are then rushed back to Berlin, where they are immediately translated and analyzed by the highest levels of the Nazi command. The intelligence is so compelling, so seemingly genuine, that it bypasses the usual bureaucratic channels and lands directly on the desk of Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, the head of the Abwehr. The German intelligence community, which had a reputation for being meticulous and cynical, had fallen for the trap. They were convinced that the Allied invasion was coming to Greece and Sardinia, not Sicily. Historians still argue whether Admiral Canaris had his doubts about the intelligence or if he was a true believer. But what is undeniable is that he presented the information to Hitler as a verified, high-value piece of intelligence. The Germans had been waiting for the Allied invasion to come, and this seemed to be the confirmation they needed. The body of a dead man, the fake documents, and the meticulously crafted backstory had done their job. The first part of the operation was a resounding success, and the Germans were about to start moving their pieces on the board in all the wrong directions. The forged documents, now photographed and analyzed by the Germans, begin their most important journey. You're following them, not in a briefcase, but as intelligence reports, moving through the labyrinthine channels of the Nazi command structure. This is the moment where the deception really takes hold, moving from a single point of failure to a widespread belief. The German spies in Spain, having confirmed the document's authenticity, send their reports to Berlin with a high priority. They are convinced they have uncovered the secret to the upcoming Allied invasion. The reports land on the desk of Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, the head of the Abwehr, German military intelligence. Canaris is a shrewd, cynical man, but even he is taken in by the level of detail and the seeming credibility of the documents. He has the documents re-photographed and reanalyzed by his top experts. The content, which mentions a feint on Sicily to cover a real invasion of Greece and Sardinia, is exactly what the German High Command wants to hear. It confirms their biases and their desire for a simple explanation for the complex Allied troop movements. A mainstream historical fact is that Canaris, while a brilliant spy master, was also a rival of other Nazi officials, and he was eager to prove his intelligence was superior. This made him a perfect and unwitting accomplice to the British deception. Now for a quirky tidbit. The Germans not only fell for the fake documents, but they also believed the fake identity of Major Martin. They ran a check on Major William Martin, and since the name was so common, they couldn't find a definitive match. But instead of being suspicious, they concluded that he was a special agent, a ghost in the system, whose records were intentionally obscured for security reasons. This shows how a well-crafted lie can lead people to believe what they want to believe, even when the evidence is ambiguous. The final destination of the documents is the desk of Adolf Hitler himself. The reports are so convincing that they are passed directly to him, bypassing the usual bureaucratic red tape. Hitler, who was always obsessed with intuition and gut feelings, when it came to military strategy, takes the bait. He is convinced that the British are going to invade Greece, which he sees as a far more valuable target than Sicily. He orders his generals to divert troops and resources to Greece and Sardinia and away from Sicily. The deception, which began on a Spanish beach, has now reached the very top of the enemy command. Historians still argue whether Hitler would have been fooled by a less elaborate plan, but the genius of Operation Mincemeat was that it played on the human element. It didn't just provide facts, it provided a story, a narrative that was so compelling and so seemingly tragic that it was impossible to resist. The Germans didn't just receive intelligence, they received a story of a brave officer who died for his country, a story that made them feel like they had a glimpse into the human side of the enemy, and that, in the end, was the most effective part of the deception. The stage was set for the real invasion. The intelligence from the forged documents has bypassed the usual chains of command and landed on the desk of the most important man in Germany. You're inside the Wolf's Lair, Hitler's heavily fortified headquarters in East Prussia. The air is tense and heavy with the weight of global war. Hitler, known for his obsession with gut feelings and his distrust of conventional military intelligence, is presented with the evidence from Major Martin's briefcase. This is a mainstream historical fact, the fact that Hitler himself was a key part of the deception's success. He received the documents, and he, more than anyone else, was convinced of their authenticity. Hitler pores over the documents. He reads the letters, studies the handwriting, and looks at the details. The forged letter from General WWII, which explicitly mentions a feint on Sicily to mask the real invasions of Greece and Sardinia, confirms what he already suspected. His intuition, he believes, has been proven correct. He sees Sicily as a decoy, a distraction from the real prize, which he believes to be Greece and the Balkans. This is exactly what the British wanted him to think. They had created a lie that played on his existing biases, making it a perfect piece of psychological warfare. A quirky tidbit that adds to the bizarre nature of the story is Hitler's reaction to the documents. He reportedly went into a rage, yelling at his generals for not seeing the obvious truth. He was furious that they had been preparing for an invasion of Sicily when the real target was Greece. This is a crucial detail, as it shows how the deception created a rift within the German high command. Hitler's reaction forced his generals to act on the false intelligence, even if some of them had their doubts. The lie was now a command. Historians still argue whether Hitler's belief in the deception was a sign of his growing detachment from reality, or if it was a shrewd move to outsmart the Allies. But what is undeniable is that his actions, based on the forged documents, directly led to the success of the invasion of Sicily. He ordered his generals to divert troops, tanks, and ships to Greece and Sardinia, leaving Sicily dangerously undermanned and vulnerable. The deception had worked, and the stage was set for the real invasion. The ghost of Major Martin had done his job, and now it was up to the living to finish the fight. While Hitler is busy moving his troops, the Allies are engaged in their own game of deception. You're watching a second concurrent operation unfold, one that is just as crucial as Operation Mincemeat. This is Operation Barclay, a massive military effort to make the fake invasion of Greece and Sardinia look real. It's a mainstream historical fact that this was a two-pronged deception, with Major Martin's corps providing the intelligence and Operation Barclay providing the physical evidence. The Allies began creating a phantom army in the Middle East, a massive, imaginary force designed to look like it was preparing for a full-scale amphibious assault on Greece. They used fake radio traffic, sending out messages that were easily intercepted by German intelligence. The messages talked about troop movements, supply chains, and landing craft, all of it completely fabricated. The radio operators were instructed to mimic the casual chatter of real soldiers, using nicknames and slang to make the messages sound authentic. This is a quirky tidbit, but it was a crucial part of the deception, as the Germans were more likely to believe a casual conversation than a formal communique. The Allies also built fake military bases, complete with wooden tanks, dummy artillery, and cardboard airplanes. They even created dummy hospitals with fake beds and doctors, all designed to look like a staging area for a massive invasion. The goal was to make the Germans believe that a real invasion force was gathering in the Middle East. They even went so far as to create a fake British general, a man named General Sir Henry Wilson, and made him the commander of the fake army. This added a layer of human credibility to the ruse. Historians still argue whether the Germans would have been fooled by Operation Barclay alone, but what is undeniable is that the two operations worked in tandem, creating a perfect storm of deception. The Germans received the confirmed intelligence from Major Martin's briefcase, and then they saw the physical evidence of an invasion force gathering in the Middle East. The two pieces of evidence reinforced each other, creating a narrative that was impossible to resist. The Germans had their evidence, and now they were acting on it, moving their precious resources away from the real target. The invasion of Sicily was about to happen, and the Germans were completely unprepared. With the false intelligence of Operation Mincemeat firmly embedded, and the phantom army of Operation Barclay in place, you're watching the German command structure devolve into a state of furious disarray. This is where the deception's psychological genius really pays off. The German generals who had been expecting a direct assault on Sicily are now being ordered by Hitler to divert precious troops, tanks, and naval resources to Greece and Sardinia. It is a mainstream historical fact that this internal squabbling was a key part of the Allies' plan. They knew the German high command was prone to infighting, and that a single piece of confirmed intelligence could cause a total breakdown in communication. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the famous Desert Fox, was particularly skeptical. He was a master of desert warfare and understood the logistics of amphibious landings. He argued that the Allied forces were clearly massing in North Africa for a push into Sicily, not Greece. He saw the British naval and air movements for what they were, preparations for a real invasion. But Hitler, consumed by his belief in the forged documents, dismissed Rommel's concerns as a lack of vision. It was a classic case of a leader's bias overriding the judgment of his most capable generals. A quirky tidbit that adds to the bizarre drama is the fact that the Germans even created their own fake army in Greece, complete with fake radio traffic and troop movements to lure the Allies into a fight. They were so convinced that the Allies were coming that they were actively building a trap for a ghost. It's an almost comical scene. Two armies of phantom soldiers, one created by the Allies and the other by the Germans, all fighting a war that existed only in the minds of a few intelligence officers and one very powerful dictator. Historians still argue whether the German generals secretly knew the documents were a fake, but were afraid to confront Hitler. But what is undeniable is that the deception was so effective that it caused a massive military blunder. German forces in Greece and Sardinia were on high alert, while the crucial defenses in Sicily were left vulnerable. The lie, which was born in a London morgue and launched from a submarine, had now caused a massive military shift that would lead to the downfall of Mussolini and the opening of a new front in Europe. The game was won before the first shot was even fired. The moment you've been waiting for has arrived. All the planning, the deception, the lies, it all comes down to this. You're now on a troop transport ship, part of the massive Allied invasion force. The date is July 10th, 1943. This is Operation Husky, the invasion of Sicily. The air is tense, but there's also a strange sense of quiet. The invasion is a massive undertaking, involving over 160,000 troops, 3,000 ships, and 4,000 aircraft. It's one of the largest amphibious assaults of the war, but it feels easier than it should. That's because the deception worked. The German forces that should have been defending Sicily have been moved. You trudge ashore, and instead of a wall of machine gun fire and heavy artillery, you find pockets of resistance. The defenses are far lighter than intelligence had predicted. The German armored division that was supposed to be in Sicily is now in Greece, waiting for an invasion that will never come. The German fighter planes that should be scrambling to shoot down Allied bombers are instead stationed at airfields in Sardinia. It's a mainstream historical fact that the Germans, convinced that the invasion was a feint, were caught completely off guard. A quirky tidbit that demonstrates the success of the deception. The German commander in Sicily, Field Marshal Kesselring, was so convinced that the invasion was a diversion that he refused to release his reserve forces for several crucial hours. He believed that the real attack was coming elsewhere and he didn't want to fall for a British trick. This gave the Allied forces a critical window to establish a strong beachhead and push inland. It was a single decision, based on a single lie, that saved thousands of lives. Historians still argue whether the invasion of Sicily would have been a success without Operation Mincemeat, but what is undeniable is that the deception made the invasion far less costly and far more successful than it would have been otherwise. The invasion, which was expected to be a bloody slog, became a swift and decisive victory. The Allies took Sicily in just 38 days, a full 3 months ahead of schedule. The ghost of Major Martin had done his job, and now it was up to the living to win the war. The invasion of Sicily is a resounding success, a direct result of the meticulous deception you helped orchestrate. You're watching the aftermath unfold, the success of the operation now becoming clear in the cold light of military analysis. The Allied casualties were far lower than anticipated, a direct testament to the fact that the Germans had moved key troops and resources away from the island. It is a mainstream historical fact that the invasion was a textbook example of a successful amphibious assault, and much of that success can be attributed to the ghost of Major William Martin. The deception didn't just save lives, it also hastened the end of the war in Italy. The swift capture of Sicily was a crushing blow to the Axis powers and a major turning point in the Italian campaign. It forced the Germans to divert more troops to Italy, weakening their defenses on other fronts, and it led directly to the downfall of Benito Mussolini. Within weeks of the invasion, Mussolini was overthrown and arrested by his own people. The Italian government began secret negotiations with the Allies, and by September, they had officially surrendered. The ripple effect of a single lie delivered by a dead man had changed the course of the war. A quirky tidbit that demonstrates the depth of the deception as success is the fact that the Germans continued to believe the fake intelligence for weeks after the invasion. German intelligence reports from the time show that they were still convinced that the Sicily invasion was a feint and that the real assault on Greece was imminent. They even sent a high-ranking officer to inspect the Phantom Army in Greece, only to find nothing. It's an almost comical scene, the Germans desperately searching for a ghost. Historians still argue whether the mission's success was a matter of luck or pure genius. But what is undeniable is that Operation Mincemeat was a masterclass in psychological warfare. It was a perfect blend of high-tech espionage and low-tech deception, a lie so compelling that it became the truth for the Germans. The success of the operation was a vindication for the small, eccentric group of spy masters who had risked everything on a single, brilliant, and deeply bizarre idea. The war would continue, of course, but the ghost of Major Martin had done his part to bring it to a close. The invasion of Sicily is a resounding success, a direct result of the meticulous deception you helped orchestrate. You're watching the aftermath unfold, the success of the operation now becoming clear in the cold light of military analysis. The Allied casualties were far lower than anticipated, a direct testament to the fact that the Germans had moved key troops and resources away from the island. It is a mainstream historical fact that the invasion was a textbook example of a successful amphibious assault, and much of that success can be attributed to the ghost of Major William Martin. The deception didn't just save lives, it also hastened the end of the war in Italy. The swift capture of Sicily was a crushing blow to the Axis powers and a major turning point in the Italian campaign. It forced the Germans to divert more troops to Italy, weakening their defenses on other fronts, and it led directly to the downfall of Benito Mussolini. Within weeks of the invasion, Mussolini was overthrown and arrested by his own people. The ripple effect of a single lie delivered by a dead man had changed the course of the war. A quirky tidbit that demonstrates the depth of the deception's success is the fact that the Germans continued to believe the fake intelligence for weeks after the invasion. German intelligence reports from the time show that they were still convinced that the Sicily invasion was a feint, and that the real assault on Greece was imminent. They even sent a high-ranking officer to inspect the Phantom Army in Greece only to find nothing. It's an almost comical scene, the Germans desperately searching for a ghost. Historians still argue whether the mission's success was a matter of luck or pure genius. But what is undeniable is that Operation Mincemeat was a masterclass in psychological warfare. It was a perfect blend of high-tech espionage and low-tech deception, a lie so compelling that it became the truth for the Germans. The success of the operation was a vindication for the small, eccentric group of spy masters who had risked everything on a single, brilliant, and deeply bizarre idea. The war would continue, of course, but the ghost of Major Martin had done his part to bring it to a close. The war is over, and the time for secrets is fading. The body of Major William Martin, buried with full military honors in a Catholic cemetery in Huelva, Spain, is still a mystery to the public. But now, you're watching the final, quiet phase of the operation unfold, the search for the real identity of the man who became a national hero. The British government, wanting to honor the man who gave his life for the cause, began a quiet investigation. This is a mainstream historical fact, the fact that the British government, after the war, sought to give the man a name and a face. The truth, as you know, is far from the dashing Major Martin. The body belonged to Glyndwr Michael, a Welsh vagrant who had died in London from pneumonia. He was a simple, unassuming man with no family to claim his body. The intelligence officers who used his body had a duty to make sure his sacrifice was not in vain, and they wanted to give him a proper burial under his real name. They didn't want him to be a ghost forever. It was a matter of honor, a final act of respect for a man who had become a crucial part of history without ever knowing it. A quirky tidbit that adds to the human element of the story is the fact that Ewan Montague, the mastermind of the operation, wrote a book about it called The Man Who Never Was. He had to get special permission from the government to do so, and even then, he had to keep the real identity of the corpse a secret. It wasn't until decades later, in 1996, that a historical plaque was placed on Glyndwr Michael's tombstone in Huelva, confirming his true identity. This is a crucial detail, as it shows how long the secret was kept, and how important it was to the British to protect the integrity of the operation. Historians still argue whether Glyndwr Michael knew his body would be used for such a purpose. Of course he didn't. He was a man with nothing, and he was used as a tool in a war that he probably didn't even understand. But what is undeniable is that his life, or rather his death, had a purpose. He became a symbol of the quiet, unsung heroism of the war. He was a man who, in his final act, saved thousands of lives. The story of Glyndwr Michael, the man who became Major Martin, is now a part of history. You're looking at his grave in Spain, now marked with his real name, a simple headstone that belies the magnitude of his contribution. The legacy of a dead man is often more powerful than the legacy of a living one. Glyndwr Michael, a man who had nothing in life, became a national hero in death. His sacrifice, though unwitting, saved thousands of lives and shortened the war. It's a mainstream historical fact that he is one of the most unlikely heroes of World War II. The story of Operation Mincemeat became a cautionary tale for intelligence agencies around the world. It showed that the most successful deceptions are not the most complicated, but the ones that are the most human. They don't just fool the enemy with facts, they fool them with a story, a narrative that is so compelling that it becomes impossible to resist. The Germans were not fooled by the forged documents. They were fooled by the tragic story of a dead man who was just trying to do his job. A quirky tidbit that demonstrates the lasting impact of the mission is the fact that the British government, in a rare move, issued a posthumous letter of commendation for Glyndwr Michael. It was a formal acknowledgement of his contribution to the war effort, a final act of respect for a man who had been used as a tool of war. The letter, which was released to the public, was a way of telling the world that the man in the grave was not a ghost, but a real person who had played a crucial role in a turning point of the war. Historians still argue whether the entire operation was a moral triumph or a moral compromise. On one hand, it saved thousands of lives. On the other, it used the body of a vulnerable person without his consent. But what is undeniable is that the story of Operation Mincemeat is one of the most fascinating and bizarre stories of the war. It's a story of a few brilliant, eccentric minds who took a crazy idea and turned it into a reality that changed the course of history. The true heroes of Operation Mincemeat are not the generals or the politicians, but the small team of unsung heroes who made the impossible possible. You're now looking at the faces of Ewan Montague and Charles Cholmondeley, the two spy masters who cooked up this bizarre plan. They were a perfect odd couple, the meticulous lawyer and the freewheeling airman, and their unique talents were perfectly suited for this unique mission. They were not just soldiers, they were artists of deception, and their canvas was the corpse of a man who would become a national hero. This is a mainstream historical fact. The fact that the operation was carried out by a small, dedicated team, but the team was much larger than just those two men. There was the London coroner, who provided the body of Glyndra Michael. There were the secretaries who wrote the love letters and forged the documents. There were the naval officers who transported the body and the crew of the submarine who carried out the drop. There were the Spanish officials who, wittingly or unwittingly, helped the Germans get their hands on the documents. And of course, there was Glyndra Michael himself, a man whose life had been unremarkable, but whose death had become a turning point in the war. A quirky tidbit that demonstrates the dedication of the team is the fact that they even created a fake wallet for Major Martin, complete with a photograph of Pam and a few bits of change. It was a small detail, but it was a crucial part of the deception, and it shows the level of commitment that the team had to their bizarre mission. They were not just doing a job, they were creating a world where a dead man could be a spy and a lie could save thousands of lives. Historians still argue whether the mission's success was more about the genius of the British spy masters or the incompetence of the German intelligence. But what is undeniable is that the mission was a masterclass in human psychology. It played on the Germans' desire to believe they had a secret, and it used a human story to make a military deception feel real. The team of unsung heroes, from the top brass to the lowest-ranking sailor, all played their part to perfection. They were the men and women who, in a time of great darkness, used a little bit of light, a little bit of humor, and a lot of sheer audacity to change the course of history. The story of Operation Mincemeat is so bizarre and compelling that it was only a matter of time before Hollywood got its hands on it. You're now watching the story unfold on the silver screen, the facts of the case often distorted and sensationalized for dramatic effect. This is a mainstream historical fact, the fact that the story has been the subject of numerous books, documentaries, and films. The most famous of these is the 1956 film, The Man Who Never Was, based on Ewan Montague's book of the same name. The movie, which stars Clifton Webb as Montague, tells the story with a dash of Hollywood glamour and a lot of dramatic license. It's a great film, but it takes some liberties with the truth. For example, it portrays the team as a small, tight-knit group of spies when in reality, it was a large collaborative effort involving dozens of people. It also exaggerates the personal relationship between Montague and the man who became Major Martin, a detail that was not present in the real-life operation. A quirky tidbit that demonstrates the enduring fascination with the story is the fact that the film was a massive box office success and was nominated for several awards. It helped to cement the story of Major Martin in the public consciousness, and it inspired a new generation of spies and intelligence officers. It also led to a number of other books and films, including a 2021 film starring Colin Firth, which delves deeper into the human element of the story. Historians still argue whether the fictionalized versions of the story are a good thing or a bad thing. On one hand, they help to keep the story alive and introduce it to a new generation of people. On the other, they often obscure the truth, making it harder for people to understand the real history of the operation. But what is undeniable is that the story of Operation Mincemeat is a story that has captured the imagination of millions, and it's a story that will continue to be told for years to come. Now you're left with the quiet, unsettling questions that linger long after the victory parade has faded. You're reflecting on the ethics and morality of a mission that was, at its core, a deception built on a dead man. This is a mainstream historical fact. The fact that the morality of Operation Mincemeat has been a subject of debate for decades. Was it right to use the body of a vulnerable person, a man with no family, as a tool of war? Did the end, the saving of thousands of lives, justify the means? Ewan Montague, the mastermind of the operation, grappled with these questions for the rest of his life. He felt a deep sense of responsibility to the man who became Major Martin, and he was the one who worked to ensure Glyndor Michael's true identity was eventually revealed. It was a way of atoning for his part in the deception, a final act of respect for the man whose body had saved so many. A quirky tidbit that demonstrates the ethical complexities of the mission is the fact that the family of Glyndor Michael, when they were finally told the truth, were divided in their feelings. Some were proud of their relative's role in the war, while others felt that he had been used and exploited. It's a powerful reminder that history is not just about grand events and military victories. It's also about the lives of ordinary people who are caught up in the great tides of history. Historians still argue whether the entire mission was a triumph of human ingenuity or a dark example of what we are willing to do to each other in times of war. But what is undeniable is that the story of Operation Mincemeat is a powerful reminder of the human cost of war. It's a story of a lie that saved thousands of lives, and a story of a dead man who, in his final act, became a hero. It's a story that challenges us to think about what we value in times of conflict, and what we are willing to sacrifice to achieve victory. The sun is setting and the story is coming to a close. You're no longer a spy, a soldier, or a civilian. You're just a listener, and the sounds of the night are a gentle hum. The image of a dead man, floating in the sea, is slowly fading, replaced by a sense of quiet reverence. It's hard to fathom a story so strange, so deeply bizarre, and yet so completely true. We tell ourselves that history is written by the victors, but sometimes it's written by the ghosts. It's written by the men and women who, in their own quiet way, changed the world, even if they never knew it. It's a story that reminds us that in the darkest of times, a little bit of ingenuity, a little bit of daring, and a whole lot of audacity can go a very, very long way. And so, as the moon rises and the stars begin to twinkle, we can feel a sense of peace. The war is over, the deceptions are revealed, and the ghosts are laid to rest. The man who never was is now, and his story is a testament to the quiet, unsung heroes who, in their own way, saved the world. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Until next time, find your peace in the quiet moments of history. Good night.